Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hello, thank you for tuning in for Art Rocks with me, James Fox Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine. Nature, it is said, abhors a vacuum. This is especially true in Louisiana, where the warm air, fertile soil, and water everywhere attracted early artist naturalists like John James Audubon, who came to chronicle life's teeming multitude. 200 years later, Baton Rouge painter Chase Mullen follows in the footsteps of those early illustrators, creating precise, photorealistic works that juxtapose the secret life of Louisiana's flora and fauna against the man-made in exquisite and startling ways. Let's take a look and a listen.
When I was looking into these early naturalist painters, I was obviously very drawn to that style. I think I somewhat romanticized it and how they would go out into the wilderness and document this before there were cameras. This is just how the knowledge was gathered, and that's how it was passed on. There's something very romantic about that. I like the clean backgrounds because it reminds me of scientific illustration. That's where my interest started with older illustrators such as Audubon and some of the more naturalist painters. They always had this very, very clean, simple background, and it drew more attention to the anatomy and to the subject. It's about really honing in on a single subject, and you're really exploring that subject's shape, form, texture, and it's easier to do that when you're devoid of a setting. I like these birch panels because they're very smooth and they allow me to kind of elaborate with detail, and I'm not fighting the texture of canvas as much. It just makes it more of a scientific panel. So what I'll typically do is start there, paint the entire thing white with a sandable gesso, sand it down to the texture that I like, and then I'll paint the subject, and then once it's finished, I'll go back with a nice white wash, which kind of cleans any blemishes I may have made. It also serves as a closing ritual for a finished piece. That piece is titled Seed Savers 2, and it's actually an accompanying piece for Seed Savers 1, which is a very similar composition. When I made that, I was doing some reading about native plants and crops to specific regions, and I was really interested in this idea of seeds and crops that are gone, and there's this new generation of chefs that are looking to find seeds and crops that have left our foodways, and they're going to find these seeds and hopefully bring them back and try and reintroduce them to the cuisine of the South specifically. And I was thinking about how cow, birds, any animal that spends a lot of time in these pastures and in farms in the South, how they can act as vessels for seeds and just kind of carry them. It was just all such a fascinating subject to me. So I kind of wanted to build a piece that showed all of these potential vessels for seeds, bringing them to new areas and also sharing them. I also put cattle egret on top of the cow because they typically hitch a ride. It all felt like somewhat of a caravan. Hummingbirds are an interesting subject for me because they offer such movement and their colors are so varied. It's just such an easy way to jazz up a painting, to fold them into interesting ways, because it just adds all these new lines and direction. And it can also, depending on what species you choose, you can really add a pop of whatever color you want without changing the natural arc of the piece very much. It's just kind of like confetti on a painting. That's South Coast. I had been experimenting a lot with water levels and water lines, and specifically the perspective change of above and below water. How do I bring that perspective in without completely changing lanes as far as my solid white background and completely removed and devoid of context and region? And I found that if I could consider the water to be negative space, the same way the white is air, but it's still negative space. It's just two elements. I could just fold it into the rest of my work, and I can merge those with birds, and I can put it into one composition. I'm particularly interested in that piece right now because it opens the door to me using the same perspective with other ecosystems and brackish water and swamp, and I can really play with land and sea at the same time. When I was looking into these early naturalist painters, if you were to take the same approach, the environment wouldn't be devoid of man-made context. It's clearly there. So if you were to take an Audubon style, The World of Birds, or Book of Birds, and you were to fold in what we've done to the landscape, how would that show up? The LA1 sign for me is iconic in its own way, and it also adds this sense of place. It can really give you as much context as I can give without a background. That is an agave found heavily in Texas. There's just something about the shape of it and the color. Like, I love the striations and the leaves. It's a very meditative subject for me to paint just because it's so geometric in its form. I don't think of my work as realism as it does exist. I think of it as realism in the form that it could exist. So, for instance, like we have with the turtle shell, I was drawn to turtles for a little while, and specifically the shell. I liked the form, I liked the shape and the color and texture, and I found that to be a really just interesting vessel, and I wanted that to be the subject of a piece. The turtle shell is somewhat morbid, and it's very hard to distract from the idea of death. So I was searching for something that was alive, something that was coming back and growing, looking at plants that were regionally specific to wherever turtles are, some kind of freshwater plant. And that led me to the lotus, and the lotus has a lot of symbology to it on its own. Its height was right, the shape of the lotus leaf was somewhat shell-like in composition, and then it just became a puzzle of drawing this thing out until I found the right composition. There's certainly a lot of skeletons that have shown up in my work. I would be lying if I said I knew why that was. I'm not quite sure. I know that there were certain compositions I wanted to build, there were certain subjects I wanted to showcase. The skull and its form, there's something morbid but really pretty about skeletal forms. I think it's just the way the light plays with the shadows. It's the way that the animal's form is still held even in this final stage. I've drifted more into wanting my work to be able to capture the South as a region. Having traveled a lot, there is a particular fondness I have and an affinity that I've become more connected to as I've drifted away. I've always been drawn to art and just creating in any form that I could. Painting became my sole focus, and it's just been an easy way for me to explore all of my interests when it comes to scientific illustration, naturalism, or even contemporary art. I'm self-trained. I was always drawing and painting since I could hold a pencil. I can barely remember when I was in kindergarten and I was learning to write the alphabet, and I was turning all of my alphabet letters into little monsters, just adding arms and teeth. And the teacher actually noticed that. I thought she was actually gonna lecture me on it, but she's like, "Oh, so you like to draw? That's neat." And it was a sigh of relief that I wasn't about to get some kind of punishment for that. It was always an interest just to be creative in some manner. I actually did the Red River Arts Festival in Shreveport. I had some paintings that I put together. I had learned how to make some prints, not archival, very, very basic and when it comes to prints. But it was something I could fund this hobby, and it was a way that I could maybe not feel like I was totally burning myself out. And it went well. A lot of people bought some stuff, and I was like, this could actually make a little money. It doesn't have to be just something I do in my in the wee hours in the morning when I'm, not working. So that was really inspiring and just led me to pour more and more time into it and then see if I could maybe do it as a career. The work itself for me is moving home, feeling a part of this community and this culture and this place, and having a kinship with it, and now trying to add to it with whatever I can in the work.